Hello everyone and welcome again to another digital signage guide. Today we're going to be destroying digital signage and making it as bad as possible. Why? Well, we're asking the question, what are the don'ts of digital signage? What should we avoid when creating our digital signage to make it as impactful as possible? And what are the things that honestly we've seen happen in the past that really make a negative digital signage experience? We're obviously big digital signage proponents here, but we want to make sure that when you're going into it, you understand what you should avoid to make sure that your content stands out and looks good at all times. So let's get started. Now, what we've got on the left-hand side here is what I would call a very traditional digital signage screen for something like corporate communication. We've got 3 zones of content. The left side has a very big, clear video file that seems easy to read. There's not too much text going on there. It's nice and legible. We've got our content zone on the top right with a little bit more text that's again static and sits there for long enough for you to be able to read it. And again, on the bottom right, something with a bit of a promotion that we want to put in on there. Write some text. Again, brief, small text pieces, nothing too dramatic, and it all looks nice with the right color coding and it makes sense for what we want to deploy. So let's look at the number one suggestion when it comes to making sure that your digital signage looks good. And this one's really, really easy, but you've got to consider it when creating your content. And that is, don't squeeze your content. And we use that in kind of a few different literal terms. So let's actually go and demonstrate what we're talking about when we mean squeezing our content. We're going to head over here to our really nice PDF that we've built. It's about BrightSign devices and how do we use it, and it goes into detail, and there's a lot of text here to understand and read. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go and grab a snippet of that and say, this looks lovely. Let's go and take this nice design. I'm going to copy this. I'm actually going to save this. And then we're going to head over to our Signage Live user interface. We're going to go and find our playlist. We're going to go and manage this main video playlist that we have here. And we're going to go add in our new piece of content here. So we've got our image file, our PNG, click and drag that into our new playlist and save and update. And then we're going to see what effect that has. So what we've basically done is taken the wrong size, so we're looking at basically an A4 piece of content, and now we're going to try and put it into a 1920 by 1080 space. All right, and there we go. We've got on the top left-hand corner there, we've got our piece of content. And as you can see, we've absolutely ruined it. Not only is it far too much content to read, especially if we actually wanted to rotate this around with other content, it's pulled and it's stretched, and you can see that the content's starting to vanish a little bit. It's starting to get some interpolation because it's trying to take something that's portrait into something that's landscape. Trying to avoid sending the wrong content to the wrong zones is something that you should consider when looking at distributing your content. In actual fact, if you look at these 3 zones here, what we've done is made sure that each of those zones happen to also be the same aspect ratio of 16 by 9. Just makes things a little bit easier to make sure that the content that we're sending is going to be unanimously the same. Doesn't mean that you can't have different portrait and landscape orientations, but when you're making a playlist and sending your content out, be aware of the size of the content and the proportions that you're sending it to. Sending out something like this is not going to have an impact because no one's going to be sitting there and actually reading it. Okay, so now that we've got our terrible content running on the screen, what can we do to fix it? So how do we take this information, which is arguably a huge amount of information, and start to condense it and make it nicer to look at, easier to read, and more digestible? We're going to use Canva for this example. I'm actually going to go and open up our Canva app here. And this is what I've built. So basically it's a slide, removes all of the imagery that we don't need for this particular message. And we've only taken a small chunk of the text. Now we can turn this into a playlist. So we might have multiple zones of content running at different times, one after another, slowly informing and engaging users of what it is that we actually want to tell them. This is far too much information for someone to sit and read, especially if it's not the only asset displaying. So now that we've saved this, I'm actually going to go take this to Signage Live, replace this old media. I'm going to go and upload my media asset file here, grab our new piece of content, confirm that I've got the permissions, recently added. We're going to replace that in the playlist that we've got uploaded there and hit save. And by doing this, we're going to make it much clearer and much more digestible. And there we go. Our content is up and running. It's much more legible, much more readable, and much more attractive as a piece of content. In at number 2, it's don't neglect your network. Now, let's take a couple of examples where that might be the case. It's not Christmas, but we've got Christmas content turning up. This doesn't look great, especially when we're looking at content that's months or weeks or even just a few days out of date. It doesn't really bode well for the way that your digital signage is communicating. Instead, consider using your scheduling and planning for content that's going to expire to have an expiry date, so it automatically removes itself from the content that you want to display. The other one when we're talking about that is this. Now imagine that we're sitting in a retail environment and we have our screens turned off during working hours. People are walking around having a look at items they want to buy, and your screens are turned off and they're not doing anything. It doesn't bode well. So what can we do to make sure that our screens are turned on whenever we want them to be displaying? Well, first of all, we look at the remote. We can get rid of this entirely and manage when our screens turn on and off via our CMS platform, so they turn on when the store opens and off when the store closes, removing any of the requirement for someone on site to be responsible for this one piece. On top of that, we know that things happen, internet outages happen, power outages happen, and that's, somewhat unavoidable unless you've got a backup power service. But what you can also do is look at enabling something called proactive monitoring, which will allow you to receive text message or email alerts based on what the players are doing. So for example, if 2 or 3 players go out, that might be your expected volume. It might be just due to power outages in that location. But if you start seeing mass player outages or something that's happening more regular, like a player keeps turning off at a certain time of day and you want to investigate that, proactive monitoring will give you those alerts up to date on the speed, because no one wants to see a screen that's not turned on during your opening hours. There's no real way of demonstrating this next one, but it's about not siloing your experience. You don't want to have all of your content being dedicated to one particular department. The marketing department doesn't want to communicate to everyone at all times. The sales teams don't need to inform the commercial teams of what they're doing at all times. You want to have a good mix of your communication. So are they offers, if you're talking about retail environments? Are they your latest deals? Are they your branding? From a commercial perspective, who's talking and why? Go out to your departments, go out to your IT teams, go out to your commercial teams, go out to your sales teams and HR representatives and ask them, what should we be communicating with our digital signage and what makes the most sense? That experience will help you create a really rich tapestry of content that's engaging and enlightening across the board when it comes to your digital signage. The third one in there is don't make it harder than it needs to be. Let's not have 50 zones of content that are designed to display everything you might possibly want to communicate. Where's your screen and what do you want to say in that area? It might be that you simplify your content distribution and make things easier for yourself whilst also empowering the message that you're actually trying to deliver. Sit down with your teams, those responsible for making, delivering and managing the content that you want to see, and discuss what content do we want to send, where do we want to send it to, and how frequent does that update need to be? It might be that you're actually spending a lot more time with your digital signage than you need to, and a quarterly update or sitting down and understanding what your next 3 months are going to look like will save you a huge amount of time in the long run and planning and scheduling that out. Okay, and finally, the last piece that we're going to talk about is not doing all of this yourself. Now, with some of the tools that you've got within Signage Live, you can start to segment out some of the functionality. Now, let's take this screen back again, for example, with this multiple zones of content. Now, you don't have to be responsible for all of these. What you can actually do is start to segment who's responsible for what. And you can use a tool in here called the Local Playlist Manager. And what we're going to do is actually opening up this notice board widget that we've got on the top right-hand corner. I'm actually going to give someone else the responsibility of managing this playlist. So I'm going to go over to my control assets, drag in a localized playlist here, and we're going to configure this to be manageable by an individual. We're going to call this local playlist notices. And we're going to say, assign this to our Fire Stick device and hit OK. And I'm actually going to delete out the old content here. I'm just going to say, hey, you know what? Whoever's responsible for this, you look after all of the content. So we're going to save that. And then we're also going to configure the user to be able to access this content. So this user, and then in the local user player permissions, we're going to assign them to that player. So in the device here, we're going to assign. And now, if we log out of this experience, okay, so now I've become a local user for this platform, but as you can see, my actions are limited. I can't go and change things like the dashboard, I can't go and view reports. I simply have the ability to go and affect this top right-hand corner segment of content. So I might just go and take our image that we want to go and show on our screen, hit the save button, and that will update automatically. So we don't need to be responsible for this just on a one-by-one relationship, and we don't also need to give everyone access to everything we're doing. We're simply segmenting the screen and saying this user is responsible for this zone, and we'll take care of the rest. So those are the 4 main things that we're often covering. So let's just go over those really quickly again. We've got the first one, don't mess with the content sizes and structure. Make sure it's nice and clean and legible, and that your content zones fit the content that you've built. whether it's 16:9:9, portrait, landscape, square, whatever that might be. The second piece is don't neglect your network. Make sure that your screens are up and running as they should be. Make sure that your content is updated and relevant and makes sense to the viewers. Number 3 is don't silo your experiences. Make sure that you're getting input from all of the teams that might want to communicate to make sure you've got a rich tapestry of that content displaying on the screen. And number 4, finally, is don't do it all yourself. Use the resources around you, use the team members that want to communicate and actually empower them to deliver that message themselves, saving you time and enabling them to make the most variable content that's required to really keep your message consistent and engaging as possible. So that's everything from the Digital Signage Guide this week. If you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Otherwise, thank you very much. If you're not already subscribed, please do hit that button and subscribe to the mailer so we can keep you up to date with all of the latest tips and guides. Thanks very much again, and we'll see you on the next one.